welcome to the Innovation Forum podcast for Friday 12th of March with me, Ian Welsh. Coming up a bit later are some highlights from a conversation Innovation Forum's Toby Webb had with Neste's Lars Borger, Lynette Chung from Covestro, Marika Lindström from Unilever and Werner Bosmans at the European Commission. They talked about developing practical solutions to the challenges around new materials and what they are made from, and specifically the innovations that are possible through 2021. That's to come. First, though, is some sustainable business news. New research published in the journal Nature Climate Change demonstrates the task ahead to meet the Paris Climate Agreement's targets to limit global warming. A new paper points out that the reductions in emissions achieved in 2020, thanks to global lockdowns, of around 2.6 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide, some 7% down in 2019, will need to be achieved every couple of years over the coming decade. While nations around the world were cutting emissions in previous years, the rate of slowing was not at the levels required. As has been widely reported, since the easing of restrictions in many parts of the world, there are clear signs that emissions are bouncing back to 2019 levels and above as economies reopen. Scientists have been arguing that this is a critical point in the struggle to contain climate change by working hard now to direct economic revival away from a fossil fuel-based boom. In total, the annual rate of emissions cuts must increase by a factor of 10, the study says. International institutional investors with combined assets of $8 trillion have pledged to have portfolios with net zero emissions by 2050. Via the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, UK groups such as Scottish Widows, Legal & General and Royal London, that control massive pensions for institutions including the Church of England and National Grid, will align with a 1.5 Celsius warming target. The Investors Group has launched a number of tools that will help investors move to having net zero portfolios. Similar UN-backed action is being rolled out by investors in North America and Asia. In the US, there's been a marked acceleration in pledges since the inauguration of the Biden administration, with Citigroup, Goldman Sachs and Bank of America among the institutions recently announcing net zero targets. Online retailer and auction site eBay is to launch a scheme in the UK that certifies refurbished products in a move designed to ramp up reuse and circular economy models. The scheme gives consumers more confidence when buying refurbished goods. Similar schemes exist already in the US and Australia. The products are refurbished to a like-new condition by the manufacturer or a manufacturer-approved seller, who must follow a strict set of standards and provide a minimum 12-month guarantee. A certified refurbished product must also come with any necessary original accessories and manuals. Fast food chain Burger King has further strengthened its commitments on plastic with a new pledge to phase out all single-use plastics at its UK outlets by 2025. Previously, Burger King UK had only committed to eliminating single-use plastic where possible. Plastic straws have already been eliminated from UK restaurants along with plastic toys. The hard-to-replace ketchup and other condiment sachets and lids for drinks are among the next items to be removed. All future single-use packaging will be made from sustainably sourced or recycled material. As part of the Burger King for Good programme, the chain is also aiming for a 30% reduction in food waste by 2025 and has made further animal welfare-related sourcing commitments. Innovation Forum's spring conference season is upon us, opening with the first in our two-part look at the future of food, coming up from the 23rd to 25th of March. To find out about the final arrangements for the event, a couple of days ago, I spoke with its organiser, Innovation Forum's Narni Brukadil. Welcome to the podcast, Narni.
Hi Ian, thanks for having me.
Future of Food USA, how's the event shaping up?
Yeah, really well actually. So we're now 2 weeks away from the event itself. We're pretty set to go. We've actually just given all our delegates and speakers access to the virtual platform today, so they're able to make connections with the other attendees already, start building their personal agendas for 3 days. So that's exciting. And we have over 50 senior speakers joining us this year, including a number of farmers who will also be joining us live from across America.
That's brilliant. It's something that we were able to bring into our events last year, of course, bringing producers live into the event from wherever they are in the world. We did it across our events last year. It was really exciting. So who are the new speakers or sessions that have been added most recently?
As we're so close, our speakers and sessions have been set for a few weeks, but some great speakers that come to mind include Chief Sustainability Officers from Yum Brands, Oatly, BNP Paribas and Smithfield Foods, just off the top of my head. I know we've also got a number of VPs and Senior Directors joining us from Kellogg's, Danone, PepsiCo, Tyson Foods, just to name a few. So yeah, lots of really exciting speakers joining us this year.
What content points are you looking forward to in particular?
My personal point of excitement for this year is I'm really looking forward to hearing from the farmers and producers themselves. Having them involved directly, as you said, has been a huge advantage holding the forums online. We haven't previously managed to do that as much when we're in person, but that's a big silver lining this year. So we have a plenary on the morning of day 2 with a whole panel of farmers, and they're coming from a range of backgrounds. We have cranberry growers, beef farmers, and I think that'll be really interesting to hear from them firsthand about what sustainability looks like on the ground for them. And as well as that, we have farmers placed throughout the rest of the agenda, so around water management, animal welfare, and chemical use. And so I think that's what I'm most looking forward to hearing from them directly this year.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that session myself. It's in the morning of Wednesday the 24th, Farmers' Perspective, so I'm lucky enough to be moderating that session, so I'm looking forward to that one too. So overall then, Narni, what do you hope that the event will achieve?
So with the risk of sounding predictable, and I know everyone always talks about collaboration, but I think it's very apparent the food and beverage industry have a massive responsibility, not only for feeding everyone, but also they have the potential to play a huge role in combating climate change and transforming agricultural systems into ones that are much gentler on the planet. And for me, from these events, the best outcome is when a speaker or a delegate messages me afterwards and tells me about a new project or a new connection that's come from meeting at these forums and seeing an actual direct impact to what's happening on the ground. So I think it's a great place to facilitate those meetings and connections, and all the challenges we talk about over the 3 days are things that can't be tackled by one company or one organization. It's the coming together of everyone that is good for me.
And I think you're right. People do talk about collaboration, but they talk about collaboration because it is important. Okay, listeners, Future Food USA is running from the March 23rd to 25th on US Central Time, and there are still tickets available. For now, though, thanks very much, Narni.
Thank you, Ian.
And I hope to see many of you at the event in a couple of weeks. Innovation Forum founder Toby Webb recently sat down with Lars Borger, Vice President Brand Owner Management at Neste, Lynette Chung, Chief Sustainability Officer Covestro, Marika Lindström, Vice President Procurement, Packaging and Beauty and Personal Care at Unilever, and Werner Bosmans, Policy Officer for Circular Economy at the European Commission, to talk about materials innovation. We join the conversation as Toby asks Lars to outline the state of play for the sector.
Where are we at the moment, from your point of view at Neste, on scalable, lower GHG impact innovative materials today as we stand or sit here in 2021?
That's actually a good question. An easy answer would be to say not far enough. Maybe starting from the point that if you talk about where fossils are used, today maybe only 6% go into polymers and chemicals of the global usage, but this is very clearly increasing over time. So it will be 20% or more in the coming years, which automatically means that it will become more important to also do something about the fossil usage in polymers and chemicals. So where are we? I mean, probably not as far as in the renewable energy sector, but there's a lot of approaches already. I mean, there is already like 2 million tons of bioplastics around. There is a lot of approaches. Nevertheless, all of those are relatively small. I think the good thing for now is that there's a lot of movement happening and that there's a lot of potential that can be taken. One thing maybe what is important for our discussion later is to differentiate a little bit between, let's say, new polymers and chemicals to be introduced and drop-ins, where you would basically have the same materials you have today already, but have them on a bit different carbon source. That is one important aspect. The other important aspect is, not to forget that really the main thing to tackle is really climate change. That is the predominant factor. Another points, of course, plastic waste and some other impact categories which you need to look at. And all of that needs to be looked at systematically. Maybe a little bit, not making promotion for other companies too much, but there have been some front runners which have been doing a lot. So at one point there was a Coca-Cola which was asking for, can we change our PET to bio-based, and did a lot of work in that. We have other big companies also on the table today which make strong pledges which say we want to become fossil free, like Unilever says, for example, and Covestro's and Neste as well. So there's a lot of companies which are stating we will want to get rid of virgin fossil carbon as a source for chemistry. So a lot of things are happening, but we are in the beginning, I have to say.
Just very briefly, what's Neste's role in this? We know this isn't an advert for any company, but you are supporting this discussion, which we appreciate. You're the catalyst for this happening as a company with us at Innovation Forum, which we appreciate. And some of our listeners may get you confused with the world's largest food company, but let's assume they can spell Neste over Nestle. What is it that Neste is doing in this space? I mean, because you're known as more of a biofuels company, perhaps. So just outline very briefly your role in this space.
And that's typically what I say in the beginning of discussions, that my target is actually that nobody confuses us with Nestle. It's Neste, which is a Finnish word for liquid, which is already a promise for the product. Yes, we are working in the fuels world, and there we are the largest producer of renewable diesel. And this is something which is important for us because we are since more than 12 years in the business and understand how to shape sustainable supply chains, we believe. It's really very important that you don't, let's say, change one problem for the other. So changing away from fossil should not lead to having a shift of burden, so to say, and have other problems arising. I know that Werner likes the term shift of burden. So that's an important part. So we think we have experience, so we can bring renewable carbon solutions, really. And then a personal statement would be, you can decarbonize fuels and road transportation, but you cannot decarbonize chemistry. Very simple. We need carbon for chemistry and polymers. There's no way around it. So the thing we need to do is to change the carbon source. That's it. And so our role is very simple. We want to make use of our understanding and knowledge in the renewable, sustainable carbon sourcing, and also, let's say, making these feedstocks available, and adding to that even by making circular feedstock, and thereby giving feedstock to the polymers and chemicals industry to make the change possible away from virgin fossil. That I would say is, in rough terms, Neste. And, well, the good thing is we are already at scale. Since we have been working a long time, so already today we have 3 million tons of renewable hydrocarbons, and we will extend it very soon in Singapore. Plus, we are going into the chemical recycling field with a pledge of 1 million ton by 2030. So it is at scale. That's important because otherwise the downstream companies like Covestro level will not be able to make a significant change if there is not material available at scale.
And just briefly, Lars, before I move on to Lynette, how will companies like yours and your partners look to tackle the life cycle impacts of these materials in the coming years? You know, nothing is impact free. Obviously, everybody wants to avoid the biofuels problem of years ago, real or perceived at various degrees. There is a concern about issues around land use change and material supply and so on. So for those listening who aren't experts in that, just give us very briefly your response on that point.
This is a bit of balance. On the one hand side, we have a really high urgency. So that is by 2030, if you talk to, or if you listen to IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this is the last time when we can, let's say, not get into the tipping point situation where the climate change might be irreversible. So that means that's only not even 10 years from now. So that is urgency, which means we need to do something right now. We cannot wait another 10 years, and this is the other part of the point, until we would have potentially the perfect solution. There is never a perfect solution, as you said. So we need to be very, very clear. It is a journey of sustainable development, which means automatically that we also need to check at every point in time, are we still doing the right thing? Is it okay? Are the impacts acceptable? And that is exactly what we're up for. So we are really working. However, I'd like to mention the biggest impact we see is, of course, climate change and all the impacts that has as a secondary impact. So we need to make sure that we do not compromise important categories, but it is also very clear this is an overwhelming problem. So it is a fair balance, and everybody in the field is, I think, trying to really make the best choices. And this is a constant dialogue between the different stakeholders to make sure that we're on track. That is very important. On the positive note, I think we have good solutions. We have low impact solutions at hand and are developing further on those.
Lynette, turning to you, just outline for us, I suppose, briefly, Covestro's role in this kind of value chain, so our listeners who perhaps don't understand how it all works can see how you guys fit together with Neste and Unilever in the sort of the value chain. And secondly, I want to ask you about what's holding back scale in production and distribution of these materials and how this can change. So first of all, just a kind of overview of where does Covestro fit in and where do you see the opportunities for companies who are so keen now to reduce their impact? How can they take advantage of these materials to do that?
In terms of Covestro's role in the value chain, I would say that we're in the middle of it. We are material producers as such. In relation to Neste, Neste is more upstream, supplying with renewable hydrocarbons as such. We take these hydrocarbons, they are being then used in terms of feedstock for us, and we produce materials basically that then go further downstream, be it in the automotive industries or be it to furniture, building and construction. So it can go to laptop casings. So it's these type of plastics that Covestro produces, actually more on the durable sort of things. The chemical industry as such, we are since the beginning, fossil based. We are an energy intense industry also. And I think I mentioned it before, in Covestro, we have done a lot in terms of already setting targets, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions impact. And these are targets that we had quite some time ago. Now, looking at where we stand today with the climate change topics, the Paris Agreement, and the urgency of acting, and also taking into account the plastic discussion about becoming more circular as such. We adopted last year then this fully circular vision because we could see that where do we want to play in the future at the end of the day? We know we need to break away from these finite fossil resources, and it will take some time. How do we do that at the end of the day? So what we are doing very much in Covestro is to look at the different alternative raw material sources that we can identify in exchange of the fossil base that the industry is predominantly right now based on. We are looking to expand where we can in terms of what are those opportunities. And when I talk about alternative raw materials, it is renewable raw materials such as bio-based phenol, bio-based renewable hydrocarbons as such. So that's a biomass part. We also look into the waste feedstock. We know that we need to move from a linear model to a more circular model. So what type of waste can we take back? How can we support our customers and consumers in order to further, close the loop and close the loop as small as we can in order to save energy at the end of the day also. So we are looking into also innovative recycling technologies in this regard, in particular for our materials. And here, of course, that is in view of enabling a source of also using waste feedstock. Looking at that, we of course need to compare what is the conventional one. So here we take a very rigorous life cycle approach. We have over 20 R&D projects going on right now in this innovative recycling space. And we ensure that we are not bringing something to the market that will actually, contradict where we want to go. We talk about big investments for the chemical industry, generally speaking. So it's very important for us that we have the environmental data around, and I have a life cycle team that is doing that. Now, finally, when we talk about alternative raw materials, it's also about CO2 as such. I mean, Lars said it before. We cannot decarbonize the chemical industry. What we want to do as Covestro is to use carbon as efficiently as possible and keep it in our loops, not to have that as CO2 being emitted, because that's the driver for climate change at the end of the day. One of the technologies that we have developed is also to be able to use CO2 and to convert that into materials. So we are able to offer actually materials that is based on CO2 emissions and put that in as sustainable materials. And this is actually being now used. This particular, it's a soft foam, can be used in mattresses, in automotives, and so on. So we have some good use cases around that. There's a lot of things happening in this space, to say, a lot of R&D, a lot of testing, and so on. Here, of course, there's an opportunity actually through partnerships to further advance and actually accelerate those opportunities. So that's those kind of spaces that we're looking at.
Thank you, Lynette. Just give us a bit more information on the feedstock side of things. I'm thinking about this from the point of view of one of our listeners. Every year we hold a conference of slightly panicked company executives called How to Reduce Plastic Pollution. And we get 200 or 300 of them in a room, well, we used to before COVID. And everyone will sit there slightly looking at the floor thinking, oh my God, what on earth are we going to do? Because there's a huge problem we don't entirely know how to solve. And over the years, we've seen the conversation evolve, but it's still at a stage where a lot of company execs tasked with reducing plastic footprint and impact are struggling to understand, I think, what the opportunities are and particularly what the risks might be. So are there any risks on non-circular feedstock supply in the sense of the conversation about land use change? Where are we going to get these materials from? And if everybody wants them, isn't that going to be a supply challenge? Or is that something that's going to be met through innovation?
And this is where I believe that we need to be, have the alternative raw materials. We use a lot of feedstock industry-wise, and we need to have different options in this regard, depending on what is available in terms of resources. So that, therefore, we like to talk very much about renewable raw materials to say that is being used from bio-waste, be it like what we have together with Neste in a strategic cooperation in that respect, so that we have drop-in solutions and can offer renewable products, really bio-based products. And I talked about the waste feedstock. I think what we can see is, of course, these are in the beginning petrol-based. We cannot let them go to waste and keep on incinerating or landfilling, and in particular not leaking out to the environment. So here we need to put together, where it makes sense, also from an environmental and economic point of view, put together the infrastructure to get back that waste feedstock and also develop those recycling technologies, because we need to have those options to go between renewables, waste feedstock, and like I said, also the CO2 emissions. If we can actually use the CO2 emissions and bring that back into the materials space, that would be fantastic also. That's another opportunity with carbon capture utilization as such. And I believe that we need to be open for these different technology options, because there's only that much we have in terms of resources on one planet, and we need to take care of that at the end of the day. So therefore, a very broad research program in this respect, so that it guides us in the right direction. And there's a lot of collaboration that needs to be done.
Thank you. I appreciate it's a complex question. Marika, turning to you from a Unilever point of view, Unilever is sort of famous for making big announcements, and your one on packaging materials, I think, is no exception. It seems every couple of months there's a game-changing announcement from Unilever. And of course, then the value chain and the supply chain has to sort of slightly scramble to wonder what that means for them and how it's going to change how they do business. But of course, from a brand point of view, somebody has to lead. And as a visible brand, we celebrate and appreciate the leadership that Unilever has shown. However, of course, the devil's in the detail, isn't it? It all has to be done down the value chain, outside your doors, as well as inside. And so let me just ask you for that kind of overview of how you're strategically changing your purchasing from fossil to circular materials. You know, what have you announced, and what do you think it means for those companies in the value chain? And then let's talk a bit about the cost impacts of that. So, Marika, over to you.
The public commitments you were referring to, we have made quite a few of those around circular economy. So as early as 2017, we made our 2 public goals around plastics reduction. One was around 25% PCR inclusion in our plastic packaging by 2025. And the other one was making all our plastics recyclable or compostable by 2025. In 2019, we thought that that's not good enough anymore. That's not going to differentiate us from the rest. So we introduced 2 additional goals. One, which was that we will collect and process more plastic than we sell. And last but not least, 50% virgin plastic reduction and 100,000 ton absolute plastic reduction. And I think these last 2 are much more challenging than the 2 earlier ones. In addition to that, our home care division has introduced the Clean Future program, which is a program towards sustainable feedstocks and clean carbon. And how we're making this a reality in buying is that, first of all, we want to be an off-taker of PCR, either mechanically recycled PCR or chemically recycled PCR. And with chemically recycled PCR, it can be then either waste to plastics, waste to chemicals, waste to fuel, waste to feedstock. And we're very happy to be the off-taker of those materials. At the same time, we want to make sure what we buy is recyclable 100%, so that our plastic can enter into some of the existing waste collection work streams. And where we don't have that kind of infrastructure, like in places India, Indonesia, we actually invest in giving the flexible plastics, which is the typical format in those kind of markets, a value, so that waste pickers are incentivized to actually pick up the flexible waste from the roadsides and unfortunately rivers as well. I think another place where we can play a role is advocacy, working with NGOs, creating brands that have a purpose towards sustainability with our customers and with our consumers as well, with this type of announcements, launches, so that we raise awareness and also raise consumers' willingness to accept recycled materials and potential on costs that may come with that.
What about the cost side of this? These new materials, as we know, are often more expensive because we're not paying the real price of fossil fuel pollution or its impact as a feedstock. And perhaps that will change over time, as it is with emitted gases from certain parts of industry. But at the moment, the real cost is not being paid in the market. How are the cost implications being managed on the Unilever side? And what's that going to mean for the supply chain and I guess for general impact reduction? Who's paying for this, I suppose, in the short term is the simple question.
Recycled materials come with an on cost. I think there's no way around it. Everybody's aware of that. In most markets, consumers are not willing to pay for that, willing or cannot pay for that. We publicly, for instance, announced our RPP tub for Magnum ice cream. And in that case, it being a premium brand, it still works. And the consumer is willing to pay for that type of packaging. But when we go to Indonesia, where we sell single-use sachets of shampoo, laundry detergent, because people can only buy that daily dose, they will not be able to pay for the on cost. In some cases, we'd like the whole ecosystem to contribute towards the cost. In some cases, we cannot. But for the new technologies to take off, we need to create the critical mass to pay for the infrastructure that needs to be built around collection, infrastructure that needs to be built around processing, so that we can eventually have circular materials without the on cost. Because brand owners like ourselves, of course, we can't pay for all of it. That's not good business for us. It's certainly sustainable, but it's not sustainable from business perspective.
Thank you. Lynette, you wanted to come in on that point.
I think that's a very important point that I was listening to what Marika is saying, and it is the same topic that we have across the value chain. I mean, as Covestro, we are doing heavy investments in terms of recycling technologies. We have partners that are part of the journey to say we need a certainty for our investments also, and how are we sharing at the end of the day the cost across the value chain. And in some cases there are opportunities by really innovative partnerships to say you have a shared objective, you have a shared vision in order to just bring forward the products. So we have proven it is possible to have a more sustainable raw material in this respect, the material. I talked about the CO2-based materials. It's called Cardion, for example. We have 20% of that plastic based on CO2. We had a partnership that was ready to actually go into that heavy technology development work. It took us many years to do that. But that will take us that far. What we need to do is also to create this critical mass that Marika is referring to also. We talk about broader market acceptance because we are at the thousands of tons and we need to ensure that further investments are viable also. So there's certain market certainty and acceptance that is needed. And here I actually think I would agree on the advocacy part. We need to also allow for opportunities in regulations in this regard so that we feel that we are making investments that later on is going to pay off and contribute. And here I do think that the policymakers can support very much in laying down standards, in ensuring, okay, based on life cycle approaches, we believe these are the incentives we need to put in place in order to create a market for these sustainable materials, because that gives us a certainty to continue our investments.
That seems like a great segue to bring in Werner for his views. So, Werner, from a policymaker perspective, what are your reflections on what you've heard, the potential, the pros and cons for the kind of innovation we've been talking about?
And it starts to become incredibly difficult for me to react on all of that. So I would like, if you allow me, to take one step back to tell where we're coming from. You all know in this commission, our overarching objective and ambition is the Green Deal. That stands for a climate neutral, resource efficient, and a competitive economy. It's our way for sustainable growth. Now, this is not only talking about technology change and innovation, it's as well talking about changes in consumption and social practices. We try to make that a little bit more concrete in our circular economy action plan, And so one of the things there is, or the main issue is, that we want to keep the value of the products and the materials in the economy as long as possible. Now, what are the kind of basic principles there? It is that you have to invest in products that are durable, so that live long, that are reusable, that are repairable. So that are different business models. This is a question that I know is maybe not the main subject of today, but I think it is the main solution of many of the problems what we're talking about. What we're talking about today is rather a little bit from once, or what are then the kind of materials, how you would make these products, because you still need to make products, and once they're end of life, how you deal with them. So that means that you have, once they are really end of life, but after you've taken care that they'll last, maybe not forever, but a long time, that they are recyclable, as well to close the circle, to have real circularity, that you have recycled content in the products. Now, I heard two main things. We can have alternative materials to put in these products, and there is a plea to go much more for bio-based materials. That plea very often comes to fight again our climate challenge, which is obviously is one of the biggest challenges of our time. But a couple of reasons why we think it is so important is that climate danger is threatening not only us humans, economically, socially, or health, but as well the biodiversity. And so we should not compromise on that. We should not go for climate goals if it compromises our biodiversity goals. And that is unfortunately very often the case, or the potential, maybe it's not the right word, potential, but the risk is there with bio-based materials. I mean, I heard that saying already, and Lars started with that I like a lot this concept of the shift of burden. It is essential, and this is essential as well in all kind of life cycle thinking and the assessments that go along. And so we have to carefully assess that, and we are doing that with bio-based materials. We are, for instance, running a study now on bioenergy. There's a policy around that. These are linked, not the same, these are linked, but we should take care that while reducing carbon, that we don't add additional impact on land use and biodiversity. If you then shift to the end of life, where this is, I think it's extremely clear that recycled materials is the best alternative feedstock that we have. And we have to do everything that we can there. And I think we are taking many, many initiatives. I mean, Marika was talking about packaging. We have our objective to make all packaging reusable or recyclable by 2030, and we are now working very hard to make that concrete in legislation. We hope to come up with legislation that maybe the end of this year, might be next year, but still. Because one thing is the principles, and that's you can get people around that. The other thing is to get the little rules and legislation concrete enough that it's implementable and enforceable, and that's unfortunately often a bit more complicated. And the other alternative source, or one of the alternative parts in that recycled materials, is chemical recycling. It's a container concept. There are many ways to do chemical recycling. One of the ways is going really to the basic form, going back to monomers and polymers, to have them to complicated processes which very often go together with a lot of energy use. And there again, we have a risk of shift of burden. So we need to take care that the additional energy use that we need for this process is not higher than the fossil fuel that we would use to make new plastics. I think that's normal. And I think as well that those processes exist. They are in pilot phases. Well, we still lack some data, some results of that, because there's still an upscaling needed. And so we need to see that. But the potential is there. So we should push that potential and push the innovation where it is possible, while at the same time, obviously, taking care that it goes into the right direction, and as well that it will not, might put it a bit too strong, but that chemical recycling will not cannibalize mechanical recycling, because mechanical recycling in most forms has lower environmental impact than chemical recycling. That can be arranged. And I think for those two particular technologies that now have been put a bit forward, so on one side, the bio-based materials, mainly plastics, and then the chemical recycling, both of them, so there is potential, and we should work on that, and we should work on the right market conditions so that the right style of innovation is put there. And I hear all three of my colleagues that they are working in their firm to do this kind of innovation. And it's important that we set the whole market conditions clear. And that's what we're trying to do within the European Commission on that.
If you want to listen to the entire extended panel discussion, please follow the link in the description. As ever, look out at innovationforum.co.uk for all the usual audio interviews and insights, including a new piece of analysis published a few days ago that looks at some of the innovations that are transforming the food sector. But that's all for now. I've been Ian Welsh, and I'll be back next week.